Bonjour. On revient à la question. Well, to answer your question, if indeed we do have this foundation culture of Creole Métis or French Indian in Louisiana's Creole and Cajun cultures, we have to look at the evidence for that. And is there evidence for that? Why is it that this very important foundation of Louisiana's earliest history that forms the bedrock of its cultural traditions, uh, the basis of so many of the food items, so many of our spiritual and cultural practices that identify foodways that are embedded in our language. Why is it that more scholars are not talking about this? What happened along the way? Is there evidence in earlier scholarship of these facts that I often talk about, along with other colleagues and scholars of quite some attainment, like Dr. Andrew Jolivet, Dr. Rain Prudhomme Cranford, Carolyn Dunn, and even the famous and venerable Dr. Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, Dr. William Reed, Dr. James Broussard, or others, the famous Indian specialist of LSU. I'm trying to remember his name. In any case, the scholarship for this is not lacking. It's just been suppressed for a very long time. And in my work, Louisiana's Creole Food and Culture, their words, their voices, and their gifts, as well as in my new book, the new book is called Louisiana. Well, it's about Louisiana French and Cajun and Creole languages. Speaking in tongues, that's it. Speaking in tongues, Louisiana's Cajun and Creole languages tell their own story, and that story is our story. The fact is that Louisiana French and its Creole sister tongue of Kouri Vini both reflect that unique Choctaw lexicon, a register that's been transported across every chapter of Louisiana history and is still spoken in southern Louisiana till this day in parts of Mississippi, Texas, and even California, wherever Creoles actually moved out to. Some of them retained the language of their ancestors, of our ancestors. These words of our ancestors remain pervasive in our geographical, climatological descriptors, recipe names and ingredients, social and spiritual traditions and folklore. To suppress this early historic and formative period of Louisiana's cultural evolution with its pervasive Choctaw lexicon deprives the honest student and inquirer access to the rich cultural foundations upon which Louisiana's Afro, Latin, Caribbean, Spanish, Mexican, Acadian, German, and Italian Creole subsets were nourished, and apart from which none can be intelligently explained in terms of language, foodways, and cultural content shared amongst these varieties of Creole people in Louisiana. Contemporary research also indicates Asian, Carib, and Amerindian peoples were included under the misleading label of African slaves. So it is important and it's more accurate to refer to these as Africa-originated slaves or peoples. This unique register of colonial French and Choctaw was also noticed by several 19th century authorities. It was a dialect known to and spoken by Bienville himself, who was familiar with the colonial French Creole of the French Maritime, as he was of his own Canadian French. Bienville's knowledge and comprehension of Lower Louisiana dialect is evident as shown in the 18th century writings of Captain Jean-Bernard Bossu's writings. Bossu mentions a mediation between Governor Bienville and a Louisiana Indian tribe, the Chetimac, I believe it was, which had gone renegade from their alliance. Bossu specifically mentions that Bienville began speaking in the common language, which he spoke quite well, and I'm quoting Bossu. In contrast to the French, Bienville had been speaking as a French and Canadian man. There is no doubt that this common language was not the King's French or classical French, although later 19th century French families and soldiers no doubt did speak this form of French and would likely have their immediate descendants speaking it too. nor was it the Acadian French. The Acadians would not arrive in Louisiana by any significant numbers until the latter part of the 18th century, by 1786. It was Louisiana's unique mother language. Bossu's experience was reaffirmed in 1803 when our last French governor, Pierre Clément de Laussat, certainly a well-educated Frenchman, fluent in modern French of his day, and his predecessor of classical French, was visiting downriver outside of New Orleans at the famous Cantrell plantation. And that was before the fateful day of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. At some point during this luncheon, the Creole family Cantrell, while he was having lunch with the family, our Choctaw-speaking cousins, the Holmes, showed up and crashed the lunch date. Bossu, or rather Laussat, records his astonishment at hearing the Creole Cantrell suddenly switching registers, and they began speaking in Choctaw and French, he says. Our Louisiana French register. Clearly, they were speaking French earlier, but it was the quasi-medieval colonial French avoiding our Choctaw expressions until the Holmes showed up. Laussat did not compartmentalize the French they were speaking as classical or medieval. Laussat spoke modern French of the 19th century, but as is the case with the older contemporary Frenchmen and women who recognize the archaic forms of France's many dialects, Laussat would have noticed this archaic form of French in Louisiana. In fact, he also noticed the interracial children amongst these ethnically diverse and early German-speaking Creole plantation families, in spite of anti-miscegenation laws of the Spanish Revised Code Noir that had been imposed. Some Anglo-Americans, such as our first American governor's biographer, J.F.H. Claiborne, cousin of Governor Claiborne of Louisiana. Claibornes were from Mississippi. He also reported, this author, J.F.H. Claiborne, reported hearing a wealthy and former coureur de bois, who happened to be my paternal ancestor's cousin, Louis LaFleur, a cousin of this writer's paternal ancestor, of the early 19th century, speaking a patois of Choctaw and provincial French. So there were early witnesses, early authorities that documented the fact that Creoles were speaking Old French with a combination or an amalgamation of Choctaw words. That provincial French would be what is considered Occitan or Languedoc today. As noted above, this supplemental Choctaw lexicon, alongside the dominant colonial French language, comprised the lingua franca of Creole-metis, daily communication and life in Louisiana. In other words, our Louisiana Creole and Louisiana French register. It included words which referred to climate, foodways, recipes and processes, spirituality and conversational terms of endearment, mockery or disdain, a broad range of communicative vocabulary. The Louisiana Purchase territory was an undeclared French Amerindian nation with its own distinctive French language patois and Creole-metis culture. It stretched from across the Gulf south from Pensacola, Alabama, Mississippi, from which are Fontenot, Bim, Doucet, André Dit Lafleur, Gisclair, Gilry, Heinrich, which became Henry, Heimel, La Violette, La Branche, Zwiegs originally, Landreneau, Le Bleu, Soileau, Volse, and other Alabamans originated, stretching to Texas and far north to Illinois and Missouri and the shores of Quebec, from where the Ardouins and Vidrines and Sauciers and Duprés and many other Creole families were living before the French Indian War scattered these people, and they came to the territory of Orleans, which became the state of Louisiana in 1812. There were many groups, Germanic groups, of course, along with the French and the Canadians and later West Africans, who all married into the Muskogean family of Indians and their children, of course, would inherit that language tradition and the food ways and mythology of loup-garou and the traiteur, which is really alikji in Choctaw. The traiteurs were healers. The French used the word guérisseur. Even in France today, I was informed by a good friend of mine who's French and a well-versed woman in their culture. In Louisiana French, the subsequent historical period of the Spanish, Latin American, Mexican, and Leños presence in Louisiana would reflect itself in Louisiana French language traditions. Legal and financial loanwords are present, which reflect adaptation to the new political order of that period. The Spanish ruled for almost 40 years very successfully in Louisiana. A few of the old culinary traditions presume Spanish are in fact Mexi-Indian and Latin traditions. For example, hot pepper sauces, tamales, popcorn, cochon de lait, empanadas, jalapenos, fava, and chili. And even pisanta, terms for supernatural. The pisanta is actually, the Creoles turned it into paysan, and it refers to that the night demon, or what we call the incubus, reported across the world for hundreds of years. Some Creole-metis words and expressions drawn from Choctaw and once used amongst older Creole folks are lost, but I have discovered a few which happen to be shared, that were shared with me from family members as well as from research, and by posterity. I inherited these things, grew up with so many of them. These further inform Louisiana's multi-ethnic, cross-cultural, international, and interracial marriages. They reveal the integration of both Latin and Afro-Caribbean peoples into Louisiana Creole-metis communities, which remain part of our Louisiana French and Creole register. But they also indicate a now lost and once larger reservoir from which our Creole-metis ancestors drew expressions and which were noted by the authorities of the 19th and 18th centuries that I mentioned earlier. Elements of vocabulary till this day reveal, as expected, elements of Canadian French, elements of Languedoc, medieval French, classical French, very old French forms. While natural, the sad reality of ultimate loss is also true amongst the Francophone Creole-metis, who've lost a larger and richer body of French resources, which limit our ability to express and converse at a deeper level that is known in modern languages, in modern French, for example, that is taught in the schools. So there's advantage for learning modern or contemporary French more accurately, to be more precise. It's true that as the older speakers die, the younger generation is further removed from their forefathers and forebears' language traditions, which they no longer use as their own vernacular tongue. And it is perhaps for this reason that the Choctaw Reservoir, with its lack of French formal syntax, that our own people, early 20th century scholar linguists, for example, Alcé Fortier, and other 19th century French soldier instructors of Avoyelles, St. Landry, Evangeline parishes, referred to Louisiana French as a Creole French. French, yes, but a patois or dialect of the colonial French of the former French Maritime, according to Dr. Margaret Marshall's research and attested by scholar-historian Gabriel Debian and René Le Gardeur. To be quite clear, it is not, and certainly has never pretended to be, continental French or modern French, meaning contemporary French today. Now, it's not the same as Haitian French. I made that mention earlier. It's not the Creole patois of Haiti, nor the Canadian French of our Acadian ancestors, not in 200 years. It's not the same accent. The metathesis is that of Louisiana, and the Canadian French make their own unique metathesis, or corruption of words, and running together of words as singular expressions are lost upon Louisiana ears. They're virtually incomprehensible, but there still is a large basis for intercommunication and comprehension. Dr. William Reed's work, Louisiana French, on Louisiana Creole French, which is what he called Louisiana French, and that of his ally James Broussard, shared this nomenclature for Louisiana French. They called it Creole French. and they referred to its Creole Afro Creole sister tongue or daughter tongue as Kurivini or Gombo. But they both share the same lexicon. They're both uniquely Louisiana born expressions. George Washington Cable takes note of both of these, what I call dialects or traditions of Louisiana French, in his old Creole days, which is hilarious. He phoneticizes the pronunciation of his speakers, and it's like listening to my old grandparents trying to speak English. Unlike his mentor, Albert Valtmont, who believes Louisiana Creole to be a dialect of Louisiana French, Dr. Thomas Klinger believes Kurivini is a distinctive language, linguistically speaking. And I get that. And this appears to be so. But he humbly and respectfully acknowledges that its Creole speakers in Pointe Coupee Parish, for example, don't share that view. They see it as we Creole-metis do, as a sister tongue or daughter tongue or a dialect of our old Louisiana French, from which it's clearly and completely lexified. The reader should know that the historic argument or debate between when and what constitutes a dialect and its genesis as a new language is nothing new to scholars and linguists, notwithstanding the enthusiasm and insistence of younger scholars per their own perspective in these matters. Still, the syntax or word and sentence structure of Kurivini strongly suggests a completely distinct language form from its sister or mother source of Louisiana French. I have preserved in this book, Louisiana's Creole Food and Culture, and in Speaking in Tongues, a very, very nice collection of words that reflect the Latin, well, what we call the Euro-French, Canadian, Afro-Latin, Caribbean, Creole-metis Cultural Linguistic Lexicon that's so distinctive and really so beautiful in Louisiana French and her Creole sister tongue. In my next discussion, I'm going to discuss these with you and share them with you. It's time for that cup of coffee again.